What if I told you that an ancient letter has been discovered, a letter that reveals an extraordinary and deeply personal description of Jesus Christ? A letter written by none other than Roman official Aurelius Linus, who was a direct witness to the life of Jesus. He didn't just hear about him from others, he saw him, spoke to him, and even communicated with the Emperor of Rome, recounting vivid details about Jesus' appearance. Could this description change the way we think about one of the most iconic figures in history? Prepare yourself, because by the end of this video, you might see Jesus in a completely different light. For centuries, we've been shown paintings and movies depicting Jesus as a man with fair skin, long flowing hair, and piercing blue eyes, a version so ingrained in our minds that it's almost impossible to imagine anything different. But does this representation truly reflect the reality of how Jesus looked? It's a question many have pondered, and the discovery of this letter from Aurelius Linus has shaken the foundations of what we thought we knew. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't the depiction of Jesus, a man who lived over 2,000 years ago, based mostly on the limited records we have? The truth is, yes, most of our ideas about his physical appearance come from centuries-old artworks, interpretations, and stories passed down. But here's the twist. What if I told you these depictions, shaped by generations of artists, may not actually match how he truly looked? Let's take a step back for a moment and examine the evidence. According to the Bible, Jesus' appearance was never explicitly described. In fact, historical and religious scholars have often pointed out that he likely had a very unremarkable, even humble appearance. The prophet Isaiah, for instance, mentioned that Jesus had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, which hints at someone who was not physically stunning by worldly standards. This aligns with the views of early church leaders like Justin Martyr and Origen, who suggested that Jesus' appearance was modest, far from the idealized images we've come to accept today. But here's the fascinating part. Despite these interpretations, many believers throughout history have described their personal experiences with Jesus as having an almost unique, spiritual quality. Some saw him as the most beautiful of men, as indicated in Psalm 45, while others, like St. Augustine, argued that the way we imagine Jesus doesn't matter for our salvation. What matters is recognizing his humanity and the essence of his message. Fast forward to the 4th century, when Christianity gained official acceptance under Emperor Constantine. This is when we see a dramatic shift in the portrayal of Jesus. The soft, youthful images of him transform into a more mature, bearded figure. Why? Could this change be connected to the newfound security Christians had to display sacred relics, like the Shroud of Turin, believed by some to be the burial cloth of Jesus, showing the image of his face? Now, let's dive into the contents of that extraordinary letter from Aurelius Linus, which adds a new layer to our understanding. Linus, who was a Roman official stationed in Judea during the trial and crucifixion of Jesus, writes with remarkable detail. He describes Jesus' face as noble and expressive, with light, slightly wavy hair, dark eyebrows, and intense blue eyes. His nose was long, and his beard was described as almost blonde and not overly long. His neck slightly inclined, which gave him a humble, unassuming presence. He appeared neither severe nor arrogant, but instead radiated wisdom, kindness, and serenity. A face tanned like ripe corn, reflecting the gentle nature that defined him. But there's more. The Shroud of Turin, an object of immense mystery and reverence, might hold the key to understanding his true physical traits. Forensic scientists and experts like Professor Giovanni Giudica Cordiglia have studied the shroud in great depth, and their analysis offers a striking revelation. The man wrapped in the shroud was remarkably tall, around 6 feet, with an imposing yet graceful presence. His face was gentle yet dignified, with high cheekbones and a straight nose that subtly inclined downward, echoing the description found in Linus's letter. Anthropometric studies have even suggested that Jesus had superior physical proportions, far above the average man. The cranial capacity of the individual in the shroud was higher than normal, implying a brain size that suggests exceptional intelligence. Throughout history, Jesus' image has been molded to fit cultural and religious ideals. In 1940, artist Warner Sallman created his now famous Head of Christ painting, which became one of the most widely reproduced images of Jesus in the world. It portrays a serene, idealized version that has shaped the collective imagination of millions. Interestingly, this image gained widespread popularity because it resonates with people across racial and religious divides. People saw it as a comforting and relatable portrayal of Jesus, even though no one alive today could have seen him in person. What makes Solomon's painting so compelling? Perhaps it's the soft, almost photographic quality of the image. The subtle lighting, the peaceful expression, it's like looking at a memory of someone you deeply love. The close-up, isolated from any historical context, allows each person to place their own experiences and emotions onto Jesus' face. In a way, this image makes him feel like a part of our personal lives, a figure we can relate to no matter who we are or where we come from. So, what do we truly know about the physical appearance of Jesus? The truth is, we may never know for certain. What we can conclude, however, is that the image of Jesus we carry in our minds has evolved over centuries, influenced by culture, religion, and personal interpretation. Whether we see him as the youthful, radiant figure depicted in early Christian art or the more mature, bearded Christ that emerged later, one thing remains unchanged: the power of his message, and the impact he continues to have on the world. As we reflect on these insights, it's important to remember that how we perceive Jesus and how we visualize his appearance is less important than recognizing the profound truth of who he was, the Savior who has transcended time and continues to inspire millions across the globe. So, the next time you think about Jesus, I invite you to look beyond the images and let your heart and mind open to the deeper meaning he brings. Could this new understanding transform how you see the world around you? Only you can decide. Have you ever wondered what Jesus truly looked like? For centuries, we've been presented with images of Jesus as a man with long, flowing hair, a serene expression, and fair skin. These depictions have shaped our understanding of him, but are they accurate? What if I told you that the most famous representations of Jesus, the ones we've seen in artwork, films, and religious texts, may not reflect his true physical appearance? Imagine uncovering new evidence, ancient clues, and scientific breakthroughs that challenge everything we thought we knew. Let's take a journey beyond the iconic images and explore the reality of Jesus' appearance, one that might completely shift your perspective. When we think about Jesus, one of the most common images that comes to mind is that of a gentle, bearded figure with a kind expression. He often appears as a man with long, flowing hair, often depicted as light brown or even blonde, with piercing blue eyes, a stark contrast to the man who lived over 2,000 years ago in the region of Judea. But is this the true image of Jesus? Or are these representations the result of centuries of artistic interpretation and cultural adaptation? The truth lies somewhere in between, shaped by the complex intersection of faith, history, and art. The Bible provides very little information about Jesus' physical appearance. In fact, it says surprisingly little about what he actually looked like. We know he was a Jew, born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth. But aside from that, we have only fleeting references to his physical traits. One of the most striking passages that hints at his appearance comes from the Gospel of Isaiah, where it's mentioned that Jesus had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. This description stands in stark contrast to the idealized versions we often see today. Jesus' appearance was likely unremarkable by worldly standards, reflecting a humble, everyday figure who didn't stand out in the crowd. In fact, the Bible highlights an interesting detail. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas had to identify Jesus to the soldiers, likely because he didn't have any physical features that set him apart from his disciples. Yet, as time passed and Christianity spread, artists began to mold the image of Jesus into something that would resonate with the growing Christian community. Early depictions of Jesus, especially from the catacombs in Rome, portrayed him as a youthful figure, beardless and clean-shaven, often symbolizing purity and the Good Shepherd. These early artworks painted Jesus as an approachable figure, full of warmth and kindness. However, this image began to evolve around the 4th century, influenced by the art of the Roman Empire, especially the depictions of gods like Zeus. This shift saw the rise of the bearded, long-haired Jesus, a symbol of divinity and authority. But let's go even deeper. In 2001, a team of forensic scientists, including Dr. Richard Neve, embarked on a groundbreaking project to create a more scientifically accurate representation of Jesus. Using advanced computer modeling techniques, they studied skulls from the region where Jesus lived and reconstructed a face that, based on their findings, could represent the man who lived in 1st century Judea. This digital reconstruction was based on real anatomical data, taking into account the physical traits of Jews from that period, as well as ancient drawings and descriptions of the time. The result? A man who stood about 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 6 inches, with darker skin, dark eyes, and short, curly hair, much different from the pale, long-haired figure often seen in Western art. What's even more intriguing is that forensic anthropologists argue that this version of Jesus, based on the knowledge of genetics, anthropology, and archaeology, may be the closest thing we have to the real appearance of Jesus. The team used skulls from the area, applying advanced technology like CT scans and 3D reconstruction software to digitally recreate his face. They even modeled the muscles and skin based on 1st century data to ensure accuracy. This approach, blending science with history, offers a fresh and captivating perspective on how Jesus might have looked. But there's still one question that lingers: does the physical appearance of Jesus even matter? For many, Jesus' true likeness may be less important than the message he brought to the world. Whether he had short curly hair or long flowing locks, what truly matters is the impact of his teachings and the way he lived his life. His humility, his kindness, his ability to connect with others transcends any physical features. Interestingly, the Shroud of Turin, a famous relic believed by some to be the burial cloth of Jesus, continues to stir debate about his true appearance. Some believe the image imprinted on the shroud shows the real face of Jesus, while others remain skeptical about its authenticity. Regardless of the shroud's validity, it serves as a powerful symbol of the mystery surrounding Jesus' life and death. It's a reminder that our understanding of him is constantly evolving, as new discoveries and interpretations shed light on the figure we've come to revere. So, what can we take away from this journey into the past? First, we've learned that the image of Jesus has been shaped over time by artists, scholars, and cultural influences. The truth about his physical appearance remains elusive, but one thing is clear: the essence of Jesus, his teachings, his compassion, his sacrifice, transcends the limitations of physical form. His true appearance may forever remain a mystery, but his impact on the world is undeniable. The next time you see an image of Jesus, whether it's the traditional bearded figure or the more modern interpretations, remember that these representations are just one part of a larger story. A story that continues to inspire millions of people around the world. And in the end, it's not the color of his skin or the length of his hair that matters most, but the message of love, redemption, and hope that he left behind. Have you ever wondered what Jesus, the figure who changed the course of history, truly looked like? For generations, we've been shown an image of a man with fair skin, flowing hair, and a gentle expression. These images, passed down through centuries of art and culture, have shaped how we envision him. But what if the true image of Jesus was vastly different from what we've been taught to believe? Imagine peeling away the layers of these iconic depictions and uncovering a more realistic, perhaps even more relatable, image of Jesus. What would that image look like? And what could it reveal about the historical Jesus, beyond the artistic interpretations? The debate over Jesus' appearance has been a subject of fascination and discussion for centuries. The Bible offers no direct description of Jesus' physical appearance, leaving artists and theologians to fill in the gaps with their imaginations. In fact, the only reference to his looks in the Gospels is that Jesus had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, which suggests that he didn't stand out physically from others. But despite this, artists throughout history have often portrayed Jesus in ways that reflect the culture and ideals of their own times. The Renaissance, for example, depicted him as a tall, muscular European figure with long, flowing hair and piercing blue eyes, a far cry from what a man in 1st century Judea would have actually looked like. So, what did the man who became the most influential figure in history really look like? According to historical and archaeological studies, the typical Semitic man of Jesus' time was shorter than modern-day Western man. Jesus' height is believed to have been around 5 feet 3 inches, 160 centimeters, with a robust but not overly muscular build. Given that he worked as a carpenter until the age of 30, it's plausible to assume that he was physically fit, strong from manual labor and accustomed to working outdoors. His face, weathered from years of working under the sun, likely appeared older than his actual age. This image of Jesus as a more rugged, physically fit man contrasts sharply with the smooth, idealized portrayals in classical art. One of the most recent and fascinating efforts to reconstruct Jesus' true appearance comes from Dr. Richard Neve, a forensic artist, who used modern technology to digitally recreate a more historically accurate representation of Jesus. Using skulls from the region where Jesus lived, Dr. Neve and his team applied the principles of forensic anthropology to reconstruct a face based on the physical traits of people from 1st century Judea. The result was a man who likely had dark skin, short curly hair, and dark brown eyes, features that are much more consistent with the people of that time and place than the fair-skinned Jesus we often see in Western art. But this digital reconstruction is not without controversy. Many people continue to believe that the traditional Western depictions of Jesus reflect something more than just art. They reflect deeply ingrained cultural and spiritual beliefs. These images resonate with people across the world because they've been the dominant representation of Jesus for centuries. But what if these images have shaped our perception so much that we've forgotten how to see Jesus in his true historical context? Is it possible that our image of Jesus is less about who he really was and more about who we want him to be? In addition to forensic reconstructions, scholars have turned to ancient texts, archaeology, and even ancient Egyptian art to piece together clues about Jesus' appearance. In his 2018 book, What Did Jesus Look Like?, historian Taylor explored various sources, including archaeological remains and ancient artwork, to argue that Jesus was likely a man of the Mediterranean world, shorter in stature, with dark hair and olive-toned skin. This matches the physical traits of other Galilean Jews of the time and contrasts with the blue-eyed, blonde-haired representations often found in Western churches. But the true challenge lies not in gathering more physical evidence, but in understanding why we have no contemporary representations of Jesus. Jesus' followers, like most Jews of that era, were forbidden by the Old Testament to create carved images or representations of divine figures. This commandment, which prohibited idolatry, was taken very seriously, and no physical depictions of Jesus were made during his lifetime or immediately after his death. Early Christian art did not emerge until a few centuries later, and even then, artists were reluctant to create images of Jesus. In fact, the earliest known depictions of Jesus, found in the catacombs in Rome, show him as a youthful, beardless figure, often in the role of the Good Shepherd, a symbol of care and compassion rather than divine power. By the time the 4th century rolled around, the Christian world began to embrace images of Jesus, influenced by Greek and Roman art. These depictions started to include more traditional features, such as long hair and a beard, traits drawn from depictions of gods like Zeus. Yet, even within this new wave of imagery, the question remained, what did Jesus truly look like? Was he the handsome, idealized figure of European art, or was he a man with features more in line with his Semitic roots? The truth is that we will likely never know for certain what Jesus looked like. What we do know, however, is that the images of him we see today reflect more about the cultures and periods in which they were created than they do about the actual man. Whether Jesus was short or tall, dark-skinned or fair, the most important thing to remember is that his message transcends physical appearance. His teachings of love, compassion, and redemption have changed the world, and these are the traits that we should seek to understand and embody. So, the next time you see an image of Jesus, whether it's a stained glass window, a painting in a church, or an illustration in a children's Bible, remember that these are creations based on the imagination of artists. While they offer valuable insights into the cultural context of their time, they don't offer us a definitive answer to the question of what Jesus truly looked like. Instead, let us focus on the message he brought to the world, which is far more important than any physical representation. The power of Jesus lies not in his appearance, but in his words and deeds that continue to inspire and change lives today. In the end, the question of what did Jesus look like is perhaps less important than the question, what did he teach us? And if we can look beyond the images and see his message for what it truly is, we may find ourselves discovering something much more profound than any physical likeness could ever convey. Imagine this: you are standing in front of an ancient painting, perhaps from a time long before you were born. It's not just any artwork, though. It's a piece that has shaped how millions of people throughout history have envisioned one of the most influential figures of all time, Jesus Christ. But what if the way we've always seen him isn't exactly how he appeared? Art, throughout history, has played a powerful role in forming the image of Jesus, not just in the minds of Christians but in the hearts of all who seek meaning in his teachings. The paintings, the sculptures, the depictions, they all carry more than just visual representation. They carry the beliefs, cultures, and hopes of their time. In the early Christian church, art became a bridge to understanding and faith. Most of the followers were illiterate, and the church recognized the power of visual storytelling. Paintings, sculptures, and murals were not simply artistic expressions. They were tools to educate the faithful about the life of Christ and the teachings of the Bible. These images were vital in helping people understand the stories of the Gospels, stories that many could not read for themselves. Roman, Greek, and Syrian art, with their rich cultural heritage, greatly influenced how early Christians approached their artistic representations of Jesus. As you reflect on this, it becomes clear, the art wasn't just about depicting Christ, it was about connecting people to something much larger, something timeless. Let's take a journey through time and examine how these representations evolved. Fast forward to the 17th century, where the famed artist Rembrandt painted his version of Christ, dramatically different from the illuminated manuscripts of the medieval period. His depiction of Jesus reflects the influence of the Baroque style, with vivid contrasts of light and dark that evoke a sense of emotion and spiritual depth. But notice the difference: the garments, the facial expressions, the portrayal of Christ, these were all influenced by the artist's culture and personal vision. Rembrandt's Jesus is not the idealized figure of earlier Christian art. He's more human, more accessible, reflecting the turbulence and complexity of his time. What do these evolving portrayals tell us about how we perceive Jesus today? And more importantly, how do they shape our understanding of who he truly was? The absence of a clear, contemporary image of Jesus during his lifetime carries a profound message. It serves as a reminder that God values what is in the heart over what is visible to the eye. The Bible teaches us that God doesn't judge based on outward appearance, a lesson highlighted when God told the prophet Samuel not to focus on the physical stature of King Saul but to look at the heart. This teaching challenges us, especially in a world where appearances often define worth, to focus on what truly matters: the character, the actions, the inner strength of a person, rather than how they look on the outside. Interestingly, despite spending years with Jesus, his disciples, Matthew, Mark, Peter, and John, who wrote about his life and ministry, did not provide a description of his physical appearance. This omission speaks volumes. It tells us that the early followers of Jesus wanted the focus to be on his teachings and his message, not on how he looked. The New Testament emphasizes the power of Jesus' words, his call to love one another, to forgive, to serve, and not the specifics of his outward appearance. In this way, the absence of physical descriptions highlights a deeper truth. We are called to look beyond the surface and recognize the divine in each person, regardless of how they appear. In moments when we feel overlooked or judged because of our appearance, it's important to remember that Jesus himself was not considered handsome or attractive by societal standards. He was ridiculed, mocked, spat upon, yet he never wavered in his mission. His worth wasn't in how he looked, but in the love and compassion he showed to everyone he encountered. This lesson is powerful for us today. We live in a world that often judges based on external factors: beauty, wealth, status. But Jesus teaches us to look deeper, to value what lies within, to see the heart. It's natural to feel curious about the physical appearance of someone who has had such a profound impact on the world. After all, we often define people by what we see. But in the case of Jesus, perhaps the most important thing is not to get caught up in what he looked like, but to reflect on what he taught, how he lived, and the love he extended to all. His true identity is not wrapped in physical traits, but in his role as a savior, a teacher, and a friend to the marginalized and the oppressed. It's in the radical love he preached and exemplified, in the forgiveness he offered, and in the hope he brought to the world. When we think of Jesus today, whether we imagine him with the long, flowing hair of classical art or the more rugged appearance of a Galilean carpenter, we must remember that his true significance lies beyond the surface. His message of salvation, love, and service transcends any physical form. We don't need a perfect mental image of Jesus to experience the power of his teachings in our lives. The spirit of who he was, and the profound impact of his atonement, will always remain accessible to us, no matter how we picture him. And perhaps, that is the most profound lesson of all. We don't need to know exactly what Jesus looked like to feel his presence in our lives. In the end, what matters most is not the color of his skin, the length of his hair, or the shape of his face. What matters is that his love, his sacrifice, and his teachings continue to inspire and transform lives, just as they did over 2,000 years ago. As we ponder this, let us also hold on to the promise of the future, the moment when we will stand before him, face to face, in a reality that transcends time and space. In that moment, we will not need any image of him to recognize the love, the light, and the grace that he is. For now, as we continue our journey through life, we can carry with us the understanding that our true worth is not defined by our appearance but by the love that God has for us, just as we are. So, let us embrace this truth and live with the confidence that, no matter our appearance, we are loved and cherished beyond measure.